There are so many questions about working in the job market in Africa, especially for those who had been abroad, members of the diaspora. So let's talk about this, especially after my last video. And since I've worked remotely in Africa before, also in the non-for-profit sector, I'm really excited to talk about this topic with you guys. We are going to be talking about 5 points here. The number one question is if you can work remotely for a US company while being in Africa. Secondly, we're going to be dissecting whether or not you have to be speaking French or you have to know how to speak French in order to work in the not-for-profit sector in Africa or work for international organizations or just companies in Africa in general. Number three is whether or not a US trained nursing degree could get you a job in Africa, or if you need an MPH, Masters in Public Health, or what degrees you might need that would make it favorable for you to work in Africa. Number four is what you need to know before you start applying for NGOs. And last but not least, number five, I'm going to be talking to you guys about my real experience going through all of this as someone who's lived in the United States and moved back to Africa and is actually working in Africa and have gone through all these different steps as well. So the first question a lot of people ask themselves is whether or not you can actually work for a US based company remotely while being in Africa. So working for a US based company from Africa. And the short answer is yes. Now, there's a longer answer to this. Yes, it's possible, but it's not the easiest thing to do. And here's what I mean. There are different time zones when it comes to the United States and Africa. And Africa has different countries that are kind of situated in different spots on the continent. So if you're thinking about moving towards like West Africa, the time zone difference between those countries and different states in the United States will vary. It's just like the time zone for New York and other states in the United States is different. It's drastically even more different when you think about time zone differences between different states in America and different countries in Africa. And so you really want to take that into consideration. The number one thing I would say is look at the different time zones between the state you're currently in the United States and the country you're trying to move to in Africa. And when you think about that, for me, the time zone difference was 6 hours. With daylight savings, sometimes it goes back down to 5 hours, and sometimes it stays at 6 hours. So you have to think about the idea of when you're working with someone who has a 6 hour time difference, and it's really not like their responsibility because you chose to work 6 hours of a time difference with them, and you have to act like it's the same time that you guys are working. For instance, what I mean by this is if you're working from an 8 to 5 job or 8 to 6 job or 9 to 6 job, like the early first shift hours, then it's going to correspond to you working about in the country that I'm in right now in Africa, it's going to be corresponding to about like 3 p.m. to all the way about 11 p.m. So thinking about this, you have to kind of be strategic. Or sometimes the hours will be different and you'll be working up to like 2 a.m. at night. You'll be working from like 6 to like 2 a.m. at night. And they would be working like 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. So for someone who's working 8 to 5, their day is normal and they have energy and they expect it. It's like the normal routine they're going through. But for you working from like 6 p.m. to 2 a.m., it's a lot different. You have to give up a lot of different things in order to meet those different time zone expectations. This could be really hard on you if you are working through different time zones, because I've done it before. I've worked remotely before for a US based company that has employed me as if I was working in the US, but I was in Africa with the different time zones. Now, respecting all like tax stuff and paperwork and legal stuff, accordingly, but as if I was still in the United States. So they would be going to work 8 to 5 and I would be going to work like 6 to 2 in the evening. And that really has had an impact on me personally, just because you have to kind of like plan all your life accordingly. When people are like planning their life, planning their day. Sometimes you have to end your day before 6 p.m. here in Africa because you want to meet the expectations of someone being in the United States, which is going to be around 2 3 p.m. to all the way up in the night, which is really not interesting, especially when you know that when you're working, you also kind of have to have a couple of hours after work, or like a couple minutes after work, to kind of like wrap up, or jot down notes, or get your stuff together ready for the next day. Anyways, I find that it really disrupts your day, but it's something that is also interesting that you could do if you're really disciplined and you really know what you're doing and what you want. Now, in order to do this in the first place, you have to have reliable internet connection. It means that you can't just be working, especially since it's remote and there's no internet connection. And as I've been saying in my previous videos, internet connection could be something that's really hard to have stable in Africa. So if you really want to make full-time income working in Africa remotely for a US based company, you have to make sure that your internet connection is somewhat reliable. That means you have to have backups just in case one internet connection is not working. The best thing and the best way I find to do this is being able to have a different router in case one router is not working. Now, this is my experience that I'm sharing with you. In case one router is not working, making sure that you have another router from a different company that's installed. So if one company has issues going on, you can rely on the other company to help you as a backup. And also make sure that you could share your personal phone hotspot with your laptop in order to make it work. Most of the time though, I find myself just sharing from my personal hotspot because I have an iPhone, and I find that I don't know, it's just something about having the original iPhone charging cord and connecting it directly to my laptop that makes the connection a lot stronger. I've tried having the router yellow cable thingy, cordy thingy. I'm not really tech savvy when it comes to those kind of stuff, because it's not something that I use on a daily basis. But if you have that yellow cord that goes from your router, the modem, to your laptop, and it connects, it could make the Wi-Fi go a lot faster. So make sure you have different gadgets and different tricks down in order to make it possible to even do this. Another thing you have to also think about is reliable electricity. Africa as a continent, I'm not going to speak to the entire continent. I'm not going to speak about the entire continent, but most African countries do struggle with electricity, stable electricity. I've talked about this in my previous videos, and I'm going to be saying I've talked about this in my previous videos. It's going to get annoying, and I'm sorry about that in advance. But when you are living in Africa, it's so common to have power outages, to have electricity problems, to have something going on with the electricity, and it's just not, you don't have connection for hours. And what you need to do for that is making sure that you have a backup for that as well. So common thing so far is to make sure that you really have different options available for you in order to continue to work. That's why I say, yes, it's possible, but is it the easiest thing? No, but I'm going to talk to you about why sometimes it is definitely worth it. Anyways, when you think about electricity outages, make sure you have solar panels installed. If you don't have solar panels installed, because it's a big upfront investment sometimes, depending on what you need installed, is just to have backup batteries. For instance, something that can charge your laptop backup if you need it to be charged, or in backup charger for your backup charging box for your phone in case it goes down, especially if you're sharing the Wi-Fi from your phone to your laptop. You just need to have backup electricity sources in order to keep going no matter how long the electricity outage is going to be for. Now, that could be really pricey and it could be really tricky, but I think once you learn your way around it and you kind of get used to it, it becomes so normal that it's just part of the job. It's just part of the job. If the electricity goes down, to just turn on your backup battery and put your gadgets to charge and keep working. Especially since most remote jobs, you don't need to show your face on camera. So this is definitely something that is doable. You have to be flexible with scheduling. I know sometimes scheduling could be strict depending on the job that you're doing, but you would need a job that is flexible with scheduling. Just because you're not in the same time zone, you're not on the same continent, sometimes things can get really jumbled up. You could be, you could have gone out early in the morning, come back home, a little bit before it's time to like clock in or something like that, and it could be really tricky. So make sure that scheduling is flexible and you're able to be scheduled night hours, night shift. And sometimes I find that like working second shift kind of is better when it corresponds to like the different time zone differences. But as long as you're able to make sure that they correlate, you're going to be okay. For me, I was able to manage easily because of different platforms that I've put in place. You would need an app for like time zone converting. The number one thing while I was working remotely for the US while in Niger was that my Google browser literally was like time zone converter. Then, like, it's just the number one thing I would go to. Find an easy way to be able to schedule your appointments. Find an easy way to be able to know that, oh my gosh, I'm not scheduling for this hour. If I'm meeting with someone at 8 a.m. in the US, it's most likely going to be at 2 p.m. Now, sometimes I've grown to really like working with the different time zones just because I feel like I get a head start before they even wake up. And it's kind of tricky to even say. For instance, like if I have a meeting with someone like 8 a.m. in the morning, I don't feel like I'm rushed to go to work because their 8 a.m. is actually my 2 p.m. So I have had all day to plan, all day to prepare and get that job done before I have that meeting. And it's something that I like because I'm not a morning person, especially like, you wake up after praying Fajr, after Fajr, it's just, I'm really not a morning person. Even without Fajr prayer, I'm just not a morning person. And so me having things pushed a little bit towards later during the day is really convenient for me and was really convenient for me at that time as well. So it's something to think about, that it's not always cons. It's really interesting as long as you're able to manage your day and plan accordingly. Now, when I was working remotely for the US in Niger, I would make sure that, I did my dinners. And this is something that's a little bit personal, but it's part of the job. It is part of the job because usually you would go to work in the US from 8 to 6 or 8 to 5. And then once you get off, you plan dinner or you have a pre-planned dinner. But if you didn't, the afternoons become your mornings. So you have to do whatever you're going to do in the afternoon, in the morning, in order to have time for the afternoon. That's a tongue twister. Oh my gosh. Anyways, I hope that makes any sense. Some of the tools that help me stay connected is one of the basic tools that you wouldn't think of. I think one of the tools is just my phone calendar. Is making sure that I'm planning with the different calendars, making sure that they're in the right time zones so that I know that, okay, I'm looking at this meeting at this time, but it's actually at this time. It makes a lot of difference when you're able to just manage your time zones, because that makes, like, that's where the work is. That's where one of the actual hardest parts is realizing that, oh my gosh, the meeting says it's 8 a.m. on this app, but this app says it's 2 a.m. So having everything synced so that way you're only seeing meetings at the same time in the same time zone is very important, because if you don't have them synced, you're going to be missing out on a lot of your meetings. You're going to be looking like a chicken with its head cut off, running around trying to get everything done at different time zones, and it's going to be hard. But once you have everything synced, it's going to come so easy. If you are someone who has family, you also have to think about your family. You have to manage like who's taking care of your children. For me, when I started working for a US-based company remotely in Niger, I had to think about who was going to nanny for me during those late hours when I would be working. I had to think about making sure that I pre-planned my dinners in the mornings, which felt kind of not natural because I'm used to cooking dinners in the afternoon and kind of like settling in for the afternoon. But instead, I'd be doing what I need to do in the morning, in the afternoon, and really adjusting for that is kind of like a mind trick, a mind game. But once you like get past the mind game. I think it's really easy, especially with discipline. So having people in place to help you with, like, for instance, my nanny, making sure that I have my nanny available for the afternoon and a little bit later during the night was really important. And also, like, backup plans. When I remember one time I was working, and I was working remotely through a meeting. I think it was a meeting, and my router stopped working. Now, I had a backup router, and luckily it was a different company. And the reason why I say a different company, it's important if it's a different company, so that way, you know, when one company has issues, another company is working, because your job is not going to just be understanding all of the time, when they can easily have someone who's, you know, in the United States working for them anyways. So what's the benefit for them? You have to make it so that, you know, you're not putting up excuses for them, and also you being outside of the US is not going to impact your deliverables. And so for me, making sure that I have different contingency plans, I have different options available for me, was really important. Question number 2, or point number 2, is whether or not you have to speak French in order to work in Africa. Here is kind of tricky because it depends on the country. And so these different countries have different languages. Depending on the country that you're going to be moving from the US to Africa in, you wouldn't need to speak French. Now, if you are moving to one of the West Africa countries, then you might need to speak French. But not all the countries in West Africa speak French. So you just have to know the country that you're moving to, or the country that you want to be based in, what language is the working language. Now, working language is different than speaking language or the national language. So these are different little researches that you could do in order to, you know, be more familiar and be more aware. For instance, you could have a national language that would be one of the native languages in that country, and have the working language as French, or have the working language as English. So you wouldn't need to necessarily learn the native languages as to be able to work, but you would need to know the working languages. And sometimes you wouldn't even need to learn a new language, because the working language might be English. Now, that might be a little bit tricky. Rewind the video, or if you're listening on ×2, which I advise you guys to listen to my videos on ×2 because they're so long anyways, then, you know, put it back to normal speed, get it figured out, and then put it back to ×2 and listen to it faster. So like I was saying, it really depends on the country that you're going to be working from. Now, when you're going to be working for an English-speaking country, it's more flexible. It's a lot more flexible, because not only for the companies being more flexible, I find, but also because you come from a country where you speak English, so it's easier for you to integrate. Now, for French-speaking countries, it's not flexible, because most of the time when you come to French-speaking countries, or when you're based in French-speaking countries, the people you're going to be working with, they do not speak English, or their English level is not at a working level. So you're not able to have deep conversations or meetings and stuff like that in English, because that's not the working language, and they're not flexible when hiring, especially. And sometimes they would even have you take a test to make sure that you speak French in order to hire you. And those countries would be like Niger, Senegal, Mali, who speak French. Now, other English-speaking countries in Africa, like Ghana and Nigeria, of course. But it all depends on which organizations you're working with. For instance, international organizations that would hire, I would say, UN jobs and Save the Children jobs, and other international not-for-profit organizations. It also really depends on the type of job that you're doing. For instance, if you're going to be doing more technical roles, then English might be required. English might be like okay to, like, it would be okay for you to work with just English, because you're going to be more technical and you're not going to be more community facing. But if you're going to be community facing, which means maybe you're going to be a community outreach person, a role that's going to require community engagement from you, then you would need to not only speak English, but also speak French at a level that people would understand. And the reason why I say that is because you have to speak with the local population. And one thing that you and the locals would have in common is if you spoke French, even if you didn't speak their native languages, you at least speak French. That way they have a way of you understanding them and them understanding you and being able to communicate with them. For instance, if you were to have a public health job, or like a public health job, basically, because that's what I have experience in, or even a trading job, you have to be able to understand what people are telling you in order to take that in and be able to do your job. But if you're more technical, and if like your field agents would collect all information, bring it to you at a technical level, and you're just working with data and stuff like that, and you're not working directly with people, then you wouldn't need to speak their local languages or speak French. Now, I'm saying local languages because I feel like people that you would meet would speak their local languages first, and then French on top of that. So for you have to bare minimum understand French in those French speaking countries in order to understand the people that you're going to be serving, because those people, the language that they use to speak with others that are not native to them would be French. Now, even if you get a role that is okay with you speaking basic French, I would say with you speaking English, learn basic French, because it's going to help you integrate a lot faster. It's going to help you be able to navigate the system, even the work systems, a lot faster, just because the systems were built for a Francophone speaking person. Even if it's international organizations, when they come to French speaking countries, most of the time they try to adapt things to Francophone speaking individuals who are working for them. So make sure that you have some basic knowledge of French when you're going to be working in these international organizations. One other thing though, I think it is not a bad thing speaking English, just because when you speak English, you have the opportunity to be the liaison between the outside other countries that are partnering in that organization with the local country, and the language that most of the time the documents that you'll be working on would be translated into is English. It's so funny that you have to speak French, or you have to know some level of French, especially in Francophone speaking countries, in order to get hired. But once you're hired and you're doing your job, most of the documents are either was going to be translated back into English in order to be submitted to stakeholders and other people. So it's kind of funny that it is set up that way, but I think it's still cool and still interesting though. And I'm not saying you have to speak French, but I'm just saying that most of the opportunities that you would get is for people who speak French. So it'd be best if you know some French. The next point is whether or not a US trained nurse could work in Africa without having higher education. Now, the flat out answer is yes, you could, but is it more likely for you to get a job in Africa with a US nursing degree? The positions that are open are not a lot. Now, it's possible to get a job. It's just that the different organizations that are going to be hiring that diploma is not a lot, especially when it comes to nursing, because nursing in Africa is very different than nursing in the United States. Nursing in the United States, I find that nurses have a lot of opportunity to do a lot more interventions than nursing in Africa. When you're nursing in Africa, it's almost like you're just I don't know how to say it. It's almost like you are just what is it? You have an associate's in nursing instead of being an RN. So I don't know how to go about the different terms. I'm really sorry about that. But nursing degrees from the US to Africa, the jobs that you would have, I think, are in order to mimic, or in order to have the value, recognized value of your degree, would have to be with international organizations that are hiring, or just organizations that understand that what level of degree that you actually have, what level of training that you possess in order to give you the opportunity to practice that. Now, it's possible to get the job, but it's just not likely. It's it's just not a lot of different opportunities available for that job. Now, the skills are very valuable. The skills are very valuable. When you find international organizations that are going to be hiring, I think you're going to love the opportunities that you would get. But besides international organizations, I don't want to give hope to anyone to say look for local hospitals to hire you with a US based nursing degree, just because nurses here get paid almost nothing. Less than, I would say, $500 a month. So make sure that really, you're getting international organizations to hire you, which would compensate you like a fair value before even trying to integrate, because that's the bare minimum you would need if you're going to be relying on your job as well. So when you ask the question of whether or not you would need an MPH degree in order to have those kind of jobs, no, because you already have different training. An MPH degree and a nursing degree, I would say, are different degrees depending on the different levels of training that you also acquire, but they're different degrees. This one lets you practice medicine with your patients directly, patient care in the hospital, and the other one is more so community based, I feel, depending on the different concentration and focus that you get with an MPH degree. And so realizing that, yes, with public health, you are more likely to get public health jobs in Africa in general, just because a lot of NGOs coming to Africa or international organizations coming to Africa, bringing jobs in Africa, are a little bit more focused with interventions, public health interventions. Unless there are different health outbreaks or stuff like that, then nursing, unless there's an international organization like emergency response or something like that, then it would be easier for you to get a job during those times. But nursing, I think the degree, it's a great degree, it's an awesome degree, it's just not gonna easily translate into public health jobs. But you could definitely get a public health job with it, especially with a lot of experience, if you have experience. And one of the things that I mentioned in my previous videos is the fact that people in Africa have degrees. They have huge degrees, like doctorates and masters and stuff like that. It's just like the job opportunity, the job market is limited. And so if you're coming to Africa looking for work, sometimes you might want to start applying even before you get here and make sure that you have something lined up whilst you're coming to Africa, or have an idea of what it is like. So I hope this video helps. It's 2 different degrees. For technical advisory and field-based public health work, then having an MPH degree is more favorable. And for implementation support or health training, then a nursing degree would be best. Now, it really, like I said, Africa is a developing country, and there are a lot of different public health issues in Africa. So getting more public health work is favorable than getting nursing work. Either ways, the job market here is competitive. But if you're wanting to have a nursing work, have your nursing diploma be transferred to a different role, then highlighting your leadership, your teaching and patient care skills is very important on your CV. But it is possible, it's doable. I hope this makes sense. I know it's kind of hard for me to go back and forth between the 2 kinds of degrees and stuff like that, but I hope it's kind of making sense. Now let's talk about what you need to know even before you apply for these kind of jobs. Understand the local context of the country that you're coming to in Africa. Like I said before, different countries, different languages. Understand the language, the healthcare systems that there are here, and then the cultural norms. For the cultural norms, I did make an entire video about the different cultural expectations versus reality and the shocks that I had even in my native country. So I would advise you to go watch that video as well. But understand the cultural norms, because that also dictates kind of like the job market and what jobs you would have accessible to you. It's going to be valuable when you speak English, just because investors and international organizations that come to that country have most of their database in English that had been translated to French, and most of the time it's the English world that is investing in these countries anyways. And so when you come from a background of work that comes from that background as well, then it's easy for you to integrate, because the French system and the English system is different. There are some differences in how they do things, how they work, and when you come from almost the same kind of background, then it's easier for you to integrate in those different companies. And I hope that makes sense. The biggest thing is for you to be able to adapt. Be prepared to adapt. And I can say this 100 times. Make sure you are prepared to adapt, because systems move slower. And that's what I mean when you come from for instance, when you're coming from the US and you're aspiring to work in Africa, and you come to an African country, and the organization that you're working for is a US based organization that has a branch in Africa, the integration is going to be a lot easier for you, just because it's a US system that had been translated to that country, and they still use the same systems. So it's easier for you to get acquainted and kind of get back into the same. Things also move a lot slower, which I mean by that is that there's a cultural aspect to it. So there's a whole video I made about how the culture and the different systems and how things move slower in Africa. Make sure you watch that video. But things just do move a lot slower than you might be used to. And it's nothing that you could do about it. It's not that you're not doing your job. Sometimes you are, and you feel like, oh my gosh, I'm not performing, I'm not doing enough. It's just that things move a lot slower, especially if your job depends on like working as a team and stuff like that. The number one thing I would say also is to look for organizations that have high support for international hirees. What I mean by that is some organizations already have built-in systems to help those who are hired and recruited internationally, and some don't. And when you are part of an organization that supports those who are hired internationally, it's in your favor rather than just, being hired as just like anyone else. Networking matters. Making sure your networking becomes even more important. If you got hired before even coming to the country, make sure that you are networking with those that are in country via LinkedIn even before you get here. And if you happen to get here, then get the job, make sure that you're still networking with people in person if you can, and also virtually through LinkedIn and other platforms. And also make sure that you keep your relations with those that are out of the country, just because they are also valuable assets for you, just like you are going to be a valuable asset for someone else. So I don't know, it kind of feels like, oh, use people, but no, you're going to be used by other people too. It's just how the world works. Make sure that you're networking, because networks can get you so far in your career. And make sure you're also joining global health forums, because those forums are like the backbones of what you will be doing in your country, and you're staying informed. Because sometimes you think, oh my gosh, this is a breakthrough, whereas in a different country in the same continent, there's something similar happening, and you could tie it in, and it makes your job stand out even more. So make sure you're staying connected. Something that maybe didn't come across in the entire video is that many organizations do value people who have worked across different cultures or with different cultures. And I think that nursing, people who have nursing or have nursing experience do bring this to the table, because they work with different cultures, people from different backgrounds and different cultures, in order to serve them. So I think, it's a great opportunity for those with nursing degrees, and even those without nursing degrees, who are able to adapt in different environments. It's very valuable, extremely valuable. Now let me share final tips from my experience. Point number 5, which are tips from my personal experience, is number 1, to really be open to short-term contracts. It might not seem stable. It might seem like, oh, you might have a career already set up, aligned in your previous country, and you're not going to be moving for just a short-term 4 months or 6 months contract. But most of the time, these international organizations will test you with just a 6-month contract to see whether or not you're a good fit. And once you are a good fit, you will have your contract renewed. And most of the time, you get your contract renewed to a 1-year contract, and then after that to a permanent contract. And that's usually how it works. So don't let short-term contracts kind of like, be a turnoff for you. Consultation opportunities are also great, and make sure you are volunteering locally. Go to local organizations. For instance, when I was working with an international organization, the type of job that I was doing in maternal and child health, there's also a local organization, different local organizations, different local institutions that were put in place for maternal and child health, and I went to those different institutions to offer my services as well, as much as I could, and as with much time that I have. And this is very important because it builds your portfolio, it builds your relationships with others, and it gives you the opportunities sometimes when you least expect it. It also makes you well-rounded, because knowing a lot of people, knowing the different sectors, like, not only don't stay in your little box of just working for an international organization, because those international organizations are there to serve the local organizations. So if you already serve in local organizations and you are part of the international organizations, it will make your job a lot easier. Why I say this is because things move a lot slower in Africa. People don't do what you want them to do just because it's their job. No, sometimes they just do it because, you know, they know you and they don't want you to suffer. They will do their job. But just because it's their job and you expect them to do their job, that's not how it works. So sometimes you do have to depend on your relationships in order to also get your job done. So if you're also volunteering in different cross organizations that you naturally would work with, then it would make you a better candidate in order to get your jobs done, your deliverables in a timely manner as well. Your time abroad is going to be your little flag that you need to be waving around and telling people about. I'm not saying show off. I'm not the type of person that shows off. It is hard for me, but your time abroad is something to treasure and something to not hide at all. The number one thing I would say, sharing when you start having conversations with people, especially if you've learned French abroad and now you're coming to that country to serve them, and your French is kind of wonky like mine is, just straight out let people know, hey, I've had most of my experience in this country. I'm really enthusiastic to be part of this country's team, and I'm excited to learn. But just know that, you know, my French could be difficult to understand sometimes. Don't hide your background, because most of the time your background would give you more opportunities. When people know that you come from the US, they know that speaking English or knowing how the system works might be easy for you because you might have worked in the system for years. So don't hide the fact that you've come from the US, or you've come from Canada, or you've come from Europe. Don't hide whichever country you come from, because it's going to open doors for you as well. Another thing I want to share with you guys is that if you are relocating to a different country or moving back to your native country, even if you've been in that country before on mission or other purposes, give yourself time to adapt, because living in that country, working in that country permanently or semi-permanently or for a longer duration than just missions is going to be completely different than just being on mission or just visiting. So give yourself some grace. I keep saying this in almost all my videos. Give yourself some grace and know that with time it'll all settle. Guys, make sure that you are staying focused. You're staying purposeful when you move, and you're not afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions. I really appreciate your question, Violet, but don't be afraid to ask questions, you guys, because the questions that you will ask would make it would help you to decide whether or not you are going to make that move. Now, I always talk about this drawing, like this, my headboard, like my bed piece. Oh, you guys, you know it's time to wrap up the video when I can't get my words straight. But I just realized at the end of the video how many water bottles I have on my nightstands. Come on, Farida. Come on, Farida. Like, it's too many water bottles. I need to get rid of some of those. I'm pretty sure that half of them are empty by now, so I'll get rid of them. But I didn't just like juggle them all into my bedroom. No, I think I brought them one by one, and so it's harder to realize that I'm like accumulating water bottles when I'm bringing them in one by one. Anyways, let's kind of wrap up this video. If you're thinking about moving back and you're uncertain about, you know, your job opportunity, I would say do a lot of research. It's very important to do a lot of research, especially on what is going to be sustaining you in that country. Know that living in a different country is not just about enjoying, it's also about being of service to the people in that country. And working in that country is going to be the service that most of the time you're going to be able to provide to the people of that country, aside you using the resources and just enjoying the life there as the locals enjoy their life there as well. If you have loved this video, give it a thumbs up. If you have more questions, leave them in the comments, and let's continue the conversation in the comments. Bye.